Welcome to the Dubois Museum and our virtual historic walking tour of Dubois. Our Adventure Trek series is sponsored by Wind River Visitors Council, and in times like this, that is priceless. Anyways, join us today to learn about downtown Dubois and all it has to offer back in the early 1900s. So tonight we will start off by talking about early residents that stumbled into Dubois and called it their homes, and then we'll move on to businesses, which some you can recognize still today. One of our oral histories in our collection is from Emma Mariel Angelo, who states that Dubois was non-existent practically. The first house they moved into had been a hideout for Butch Cassidy and his gang, and is also where Aunt Essie was born. Later, her grandfather built a sort of hotel that grandmother ran. Grandfather carried mail from Lander to Dubois in the middle 1890s. Harry Angelo met the Boardmans in Rawlins in 1901 to take them to Brooks Lake. According to Frank Moriarty, they were the first wheel wagons to go into Brooks Lake on a trip. Charlie Moore also said that Harry and Will were the first outfitters in the whole area, the first people to bring Easterners in and take them on hunting and fishing trips. Another oral history from Arthur, or Dutch Nipper, who came to the area in around 1903, states that there was no such thing as Riverton or Shoshone. They were headed to Canada from Colorado. The highway over the mountain now, that wasn't nothing but a trail over there then. You couldn't. And we got to the foot of Toady Pass up there. Why, we didn't have power enough to pull the wagons over the mountain, and just using horses, 4 horses on a wagon, in them days. And we turned around, started back out, and going back over towards Thermopolis. Out that way, and we got over here in what they called Owl Creek and the old mail camp, and ran onto the beef roundup over there. Them old guys was rounding up their cattle that they had been running on the reservation then. And Dad got to talking to one that was punching cows there, and he leased him his place in the Dubois country. The Nippers fenced in the old EA ranch entirely, as well as other places too. They put hay up for Kissinger up Dunor, and leased and purchased several properties running cows and horses. Neighbors that they had included the Yarnells and the Stringers. There was nothing in Dubois, only a saloon, and then Welty's started a post office up the Horse Creek about a mile. Then Frank Welty bought out John Hugh and Huey Yowman and Bert Caldwell at the present-day site of Welty's. They got freight from Casper and Rollins for Welty's store, and sometimes Baldwin's store in Lander. They also ordered items from Montgomery Ward. They moved to Crowheart when he was married in 1918. And later on, he helped build the railroad in Lander, where 40 to 50 head of workhorses were used. In 1909, they started using teams of smaller horses to pull sagebrush west of Dubois. It was all sagebrush. Then, after other odds and ends jobs with horses, he ended up at the Double Diamond with a shipment of 2,500 head of southern steers and a carload of southern horses. Some green broke, some not halter broke from Texas. On their own operation, they raised Jersey cows. There was a creamer in Lander, and they would ship 10-gallon containers to Lander to the creamer. The Swedes in a tie camp was the best class of people in the world, They'd give you the shirt off their back if you needed it. Just get out there and work like a dog, But people don't do that anymore. It's all reaching for this thing called money. Here at the Dubois Museum, we have another journal from William Bartholomew Jr., who was a tourist to the area in 1907. He was on a hunting trip with 3 others. He was a 25-year-old bachelor and an insurance broker from Chicago. They joined a friend and Wyoming native, Russell Tharp, who later became the chief inspector and secretary for the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. Tharp was a friend of Owen Wister, the author of The Virginian, and he is thought to have joined the hunting party at some point. Einar Anderson was their hunting guide. When they arrived in Lander, Charlie Moore greeted them. They made it to Fort Washakie after killing about 15 rattlesnakes. A dance was given for us by the Indians. About 700 Indians were present. They were introduced to the council by one of the Washakies. They were also invited to beat their drums. They took them up on this offer. It was exhausting. I have traveled abroad several times and have seen a great many sights, but I assure you, my dear friends, this was the most imposing sight I have ever seen. The young bucks were dressed and painted in regular war style, and the contortions and grimaces they made were absolutely real. I took a great many interesting pictures of the various Indians, but always had my pocket full of candy and cigars, because an Indian will not let you take their picture without gifts. They stayed there for about a week learning how to ride horses. It took 5 days to get to Dubois. One ranch in between Fort Washakie and Dubois was the J.K. Ranch. They were in Dubois for 2 days to get their horses shod and purchase their licenses from Justice of the Peace Olney Green, and got supplies. The town of Dubois consisted of 7 buildings: a saloon, which was a meeting place or the club, a general store where all the ladies met, a bottling house, a blacksmith shop, and 3 residences. After leaving Dubois, we went to Jackson Lake and the Teton Mountains. The town school and dance hall. Elsie Stallnecker was the first teacher in Dubois from 1911 and 1912. She states, "Such a little straggling string of log houses there were, at this merging of Horse Creek and Wind River, with Windy Peak and Whiskey Mountain high above the south." Elsie had school in a dance hall opposite Welty's store, high up against the cliff. Equipment was extremely primitive, just tables and benches circled around the big wood-burning heating stove. The school stuff had to be all put away against the walls when a dance was due. As winter came on, the airy dance hall got too cold for the big wood stove to combat. The little school moved over to St. Thomas, where it settled in for the rest of the year. Dubois Club Bar. Originally built in 1902 by Burt Caldwell and Kay Clark, the Dubois Club Bar operated as a saloon until 1909. Burt Caldwell originally homesteaded where the KOA is today around 1872. The log cabin for gatherings was his original cabin. He was the owner of one of the first bars in town. Frank A. Welty's account of the flood from oral history states that water forced open the doors. Dad and Mother were trying to hold the doors closed. Mother screamed when the water opened the door, then sat the kids on the kitchen table so that they would not get wet. The flood lasted about 45 minutes to an hour before it receded. My dad, grandmother, and aunt tried to get over to their grandfather's, which was on the same side of the river east, and 45 minutes later, Dad got there. The house was washed away. Turns out this was the only house to wash away. They took the kids to Albert Stringer's house to put them to bed. Hail was about 2 to 3 feet high in the house. The storm did not hit the rocking chair ranch. Was not as far up Horse Creek as Pony Creek. Flood damage, surprisingly, did not wash out banks, and after the event, they had a big rock dike put in behind the Yellowstone Hotel and planted cottonwood trees. The trees and dike were installed by his dad upstream from the hotel the same summer after the flood. Elsie Stallnacker's account states, as long as anyone lives who went through that July night in 1919 on Wind River, Dubois will not forget that flood. The whole month had been terribly hot and dry. The evening of the 30th, the drought suddenly broke with a terrific rainstorm, the wind and hail to match. The hail itself piled higher than the running boards of Oscar Stringer's car. The worst of the storm was 7 miles north of Dubois. It was the wall of water from here, sweeping down Horse Creek and into the Wind River, that did the damage. Floyd and Elsie, with their 6-year-old son Dean, were living less than 2 miles below. We were shocked awake about 11 o'clock when a timber from the Horse Creek Bridge hit the cabin, knocked it sideways and against a tree. The door burst open and a wall of water roared inside. Floyd, with the strength of frenzy, beat an opening in the roof with a kitchen chair. We climbed through the roof into the wild night, sensing as we climbed that the house was washing away below them. A big branch of cottonwood stuck out close over their heads. With no alternative, we swung up on it and into the slight shelter of the tree. There we sat the rest of the wild night. They say the Stringers walked into Dubois in 1899. Oscar Stringer and his brothers Asa, Ernest, and Albert Stringer all built the Stringer Hotel and opened in January of 1914. Oscar and Nettie, their sister, ran the hotel. Oscar handled registry and was also the postmaster. Nettie was a cook and served the meals. The second and third stories all had grates in the floor to allow what little heat there was to go upstairs. The hotel was not as opulent as the future Ramshorn Inn would be, and one time a salesman stayed at the hotel on one of his first trips to Dubois. It was the middle of winter and very cold. He spent an uncomfortable night. When he came to the lobby of the hotel to warm up around the heating vent, Jack Cunningham had just arrived from his place on the Dunor and was standing in his overcoat and cap with his eyebrows and beard frosted and full of icicles. Upon seeing the frozen man, the salesman exclaimed, "My God, what room did you have?" The blacksmith shop. Wagons were not the fastest or the most comfortable mode of transportation, nor were they always reliable. Wheels broke and axles snapped. Dubois did not have a dedicated cartwright, but it did have an established blacksmith by 1902. Conveniently located on the main thoroughfare through the small town, the mechanical problems, like poor brakes or sputtering radiators that plagued cars, caused service stations to spring up across the country. The blacksmith shop that sat on the corner of the main street through Dubois once repaired wagons, but soon found a new calling as a repair shop. Sometime before 1924, the building became the Dubois Garage, and local or visiting motorists could stop in to get needed repairs before heading back out on the dirt roads. The filling station occupied the lot right next to the garage, with a single pump that allowed motorists to pull under an overhang and have attendants fill up their tanks. The Dubois Mercantile, constructed in 1913, opened with $50,000 worth of fresh stock and capital. C.E. Birdsall was the first manager before resigning to go back to his ranch work. W.K. Carson, a well-known and enterprising realty man, was the president. George Hayes managed the company in January 1914, before handing over the role to James D. Stewart, who worked at the J.K. Moore Company store in Fort Washakie. Stewart managed the Mercantile for 17 years. The St. Thomas Episcopal Church. In 1901, Reverend John Roberts started performing services in the Dubois area. By 1905, Dr. Francis Welty donated 2 lots for the church to build on. Alice Hewitt, Doc Welty's daughter, donated the land behind the church for the town cemetery. 1910, construction was completed for the church with logs that were cut at the Thai camp. Martin and Lydia Olson donated the first stained glass window for the church. Welty's General Store. In 1889, Frank Welty Sr. purchased the store from Harry or Huey Yauman and George Hayes. The original store was located up Horse Creek. Frank A. Welty was born in 1914. Frank A. remembers his grandfather, Francis H. Welty, or Doc Welty, had a short fuse and got over it quick too. He never held grudges and was always late. He was an army doctor for a while. Carl was born in Fairfax, Virginia, and moved around a lot. He was a good pneumonia doctor and a fairly good surgeon. Frank A.'s father faulted him for sandbagging and taking the easy way out by being a military doctor. He transferred when they finished at the fort. Filed for a homestead on the creek after that. Doc Welty had a habit of knocking rocks out of paths when walking, and he always wore soft-soled kangaroo shoes. He always brought up unpleasant stuff at the dinner table. Doc Welty transferred to Kansas, where it was warmer, and left the family behind. He ended up quitting there and moving to Dubois with the family in 1906 and left the military. In 1889, they started the store up Horse Creek, which had this sign. The Amoretti Welty Helmer and Company Bank. In 1911, this building was built by the Williamson brothers. Amoretti and Welty were owners, and Helmer just took care of the daily business. The Rustic Pine Tavern was built in 1919 by the Shippen brothers. Upstairs was a boarding house, and downstairs was ran as a highway cafe or pool hall. They used diseased wood that is still in place today for the interior. Bob Harder and Mike Gifford changed it to the Rustic Pine Tavern and ran it as a bar starting around 1935. Thank you for sticking it out with us on this walking tour. We appreciate your dedication to the museum. I hope that you learned something today and will join us in the museum or on one of our in-person Wind River Visitors Council Adventure Trek series in the future. If not, it was great meeting with you today, and hopefully you will consider donating to the museum in the future if you are able. Our phone number is 307-455-2284 if you have any questions. Thanks again.